So let's talk about what this does. So on add-on developers, it's about implementing best practice. We have worked very closely with Intuit here, who have had something in place for a number of years. And for those of you that have been through that, you'll recognise some of the parts of the standard. It enables add-on developers to self-assess against these requirements. That doesn't mean your DSP, the API contributor, may require you to do some of this. They may actually test it. But those details must, at a minimum, be self-assessed or certified once a year. For the DSPs with Marketplace, this provides an ability to certify those add-ons as required or self-assessed against evidence, and I expect it'll be a mixture of the two, and also to inform the DPO of widely used add-ons so that the DPO, and ATO rather, can manage that risk where you might have someone that has 600-700 connections across 4 or 5 and obviously is at a higher risk. Okay, so we're going to start with encryption key management. So again, for DSPs, you will see elements of this that are similar to what you've already had to go through operational framework. For many of the add-ons, you may or may not have seen these things. So encryption key management is about both the keys you are using to secure your system, so they may be your app server TLS keys and how you manage those, but also how you're dealing with the OAuth tokens that are delivered to you from the APIs. And this is about having a written policy and about demonstrating you've actually implemented the policy. For those of you using AWS and Azure, a lot of this stuff is out of the box. They have really simple management stuff for you in there. You can do it manually. It's quite a bit more work, and you're going to have to make that decision and then present why you've made that decision. But this is best practice. And for those of you who understand OAuth, the refresh tokens can live a considerable amount of time, a year plus, so they need to be encrypted and they need to be managed properly because that places a risk, obviously, on the network. Encryption in transit. This one will hopefully be a bit easier for people because I would be very surprised if anyone on this call hasn't already done it. What this is saying is you must use HTTPS. You must have it. You must enforce it on your app servers. Ideally, you're not offering anything over HTTP. You also must be using TLS 1.2 or higher. I would expect this to go to 1.3 fairly rapidly, and also there on the keys. The other thing is, for those of you looking at this, there's a service called SSL Labs. It's free. It will externally monitor your, test your app server and give you a report back. And quite nicely, it then gives you a link to FAQs on how to implement security best practices. It's a level higher than this. It is where we would recommend you start. You want to meet everything there. For those of you that are going to be PEPAL e-invoicing access points, you're already required to meet that SSL lab and present that certificate. Authentication. This one will possibly be a jump for many add-ons. You're now going to be required to do two-step authentication. It's been best practice for some time. There are lots and lots of good reasons for doing this, which I won't go into now. You're now going to have to do it. Moreover, it's going to require strong passwords. What you'll notice isn't here, which again is best practice, is rotation of passwords. As we know, two-step is much better than that. Use of password managers means that rotation of passwords is not necessarily a best practice anymore. Indirect access to data. So this is about APIs. So obviously an ecosystem is not just about a DSP that connects to the ATO and then an add-on that connects to the DSP. It's multi-layered, and many of the add-ons have APIs of their own. You're now going to have to say, what is your policy for dealing with that API? Are you requiring the customer to give permission to third parties? Are there any situations where third parties have access and that access is not done without explicit permission? And there are valid reasons for doing that. You might be using something like Mixpanel. This is about doing an audit on your systems, being able to justify what you've done. And this is a little bit more than most have done in the past. And there are very, very good reasons for it. Because you're dealing with tax data, it flows into the ATO, and we're trying to take what is a modern, complex API-based ecosystem and manage the risk in that. App server configuration. SSL Labs and the HTTPS will actually help with some of this. It doesn't cover it entirely. So this is about making sure that whatever your app server is, be that Tomcat, Apache, Nginx, other various app servers, that you're following best practice. Those exist. There's some recommendations there. You will find that your DSP may already place requirements on you. I have heard within the ecosystem that when you're being audited, you're going to have to say what technology you're using. And if you're using some technologies, for example, PHP, this may go into more detail wanting to know how you've configured your app server. However, if you're using AWS or Azure, particularly their serverless environments, much of this stuff is configured out of the box and you can't actually switch it off. It's best practice based and it's there. So, for example, AWS's API gateway, lots of reasons it may not work in your environment, lots of reasons it may work, but it does all of this out of the box and you can't switch it off. So it's going to make life a little bit easier for some of the stuff. Vulnerability management. So this comes down to how you're coding and coding best practices. Making sure that you're covering OWASP top 10. None of this should be new to people in this room. It's things like protecting against SQL XML injection, making sure that you're sanitizing fields on their way through. And again, OWASP provides those on their website, very easy to run through. These are things you should be doing already. This is about making sure you do actually. Okay, encryption at rest. So again, if you're using the public cloud providers, infrastructure as a service, most of this you have to make a real effort to turn it off, so it's there by default. You may also find that your DSP requires an extra level here, which is looking at those OAuth tokens and ensuring they're also encrypted at a field level, not just having the disk or database level encryption turned on, which is, in the case of both AWS and Azure and many of the other systems, transparent to you. Lots of good reasons for this. We don't want to see those OAuth tokens get away. We don't want to see taxpayer data getting stolen. Audit logging. Again, this is making sure that when something does go wrong, and it will go wrong, we all know that, and we're seeing the evidence of various attacks that comes out almost daily now. You need to have a log there so you know it's happened and you can react to it and you can fix a breach afterwards. You're going to need to retain them as appropriate. We're making a recommendation here of 12 months, and they must be immutable and secure. You've got to be able to actually get them. Again, without drilling into AWS and Azure, for those of you that are cloud hosted, and many are, this stuff is turned on by default. It's just there, which is very handy. Data hosting. This one's new. For many of you, you will have market considerations that are putting pressure on you to do this already. And this is about give consideration to where you're hosting. And as it says there, that pretty much means you're not going to be hosting in China or North Korea or Iran or Syria. And you're going to have to give a valid reason why you have hosted something outside European Union, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, US, which are the places we know are going to have good sovereignty counterparty risk. Monitoring non-breach reporting. So in extension to logging, you've got to be monitoring this stuff well as well and demonstrate that you're doing so. So it's not enough to say, yes, we're doing it. Hey, we switched on CloudWatch. You're actually going to show what do you have processes in place for dealing with problems as they occur? How are you doing that? And if you have a breach, you want to be giving that information to your DSP, multiple DSPs, so they can manage the risk to them of their data getting extracted, and that information then maybe passed back to the ATO as necessary so they can understand something that happened. And we have this in intricate detail on the ABSIO website, and I would suggest going through and reading it. Worth mentioning, this is a standard. How you implement it will be up to you, and understanding your risk profile and understanding your systems and what's going on there. So, for example, the difference between an OAuth 1A and an OAuth 2 is significant, and how you secure those things. And it will probably mean that as an add-on dealing with multiple DSPs, it will be slightly different between them. Or there might be extra level, but hopefully it means a lot of the work you're doing is repeatable and you're not going to have to do multiple weeks worth of work at a minimum across 4 or 5 plus DSPs or APIs that you're connecting to